Hello YouTube. Bane666 here. Welcome to my new series, where I explore some of the fallacious, inconsistent, or ludicrous claims of discrimination, or oppression, made by modern-day Western feminists. So let's get stuck into it. One of the cornerstones of modern-day feminism is patriarchy theory. Patriarchy theory can be broken down into three simple components. 1. There are no differences between the sexes, apart from genitalia, and all gender identity is a social construct.
Now, before I start, there's one thing I want to make perfectly clear. Ideologically, I'm coming at this from the premise that men and women are basically the same. Apart from a few biological things, there are no fundamental differences between men and women. Neither gender is smarter than the other, or funnier than the other, or more capable than the other. Neither one's better at math or driving. Beyond from the really, really basic biological stuff, like women can give birth and men have penises, there's really no fundamental difference. We deserve to be treated equally. We're just as capable of everything as the other gender.
2. Society has been constructed by males, for the benefit of males, and at the expense of females.
So, sexism. Human beings have been around for about 130 to 150,000 years, give or take. And every single society in that time period has been sexist against women. Men have been in charge in every country, every time period, ever. So there's never been a matriarchal society in history. In fact, every society has been patriarchal. And for most of human history, the question is not which societies are sexist and which ones aren't sexist. It's which societies are less sexist.
And 3. Males did this by force. In essence, females have been subjugated by a masculine, tyrannical force for the entirety of human history.
Back then, when, there's limited food and there's very little shelter and not very much in terms of clothing, and you're nomadic, it was pretty hard to get a nice, being out of commission meant that you couldn't do very much. And so, because men got control of the weaponry, because we weren't constantly having kids, men basically got to decide the rules. Because if I have a spear and someone else is telling me, hey, this is a violation of basic human rights, I have the great response. Hey, guess what? Don't listen to me. I kill you. It's the method used by dictatorships all over the world.
The link to that guy's full video is below, as always. He does a fairly good job of summing up feminist patriarchy theory. But the question should be, is this an accurate version of history? Or is it bias, bigoted, oversimplified ideology? To answer that, let's start with part 1. So feminist ideology dictates that there are no differences between the sexes, apart from genitalia, and all gender identity is a social construct. For example, this article from Lindy West on Jezebel. Yes, Lindy West is back again. The article is called, "You Can Tell Evolutionary Psychology Isn't True Because It's Not True." Yep, great logic there, but let's read a bit of it. I don't want to hate evolutionary psychology, but I do. I hate it. It's a field of study that could be legitimately interesting, if it weren't constantly being twisted into a justification for backward, and, frankly, unevolved, anti-feminist bullshit. Like, sure, maybe a part of me does want a dude who could kick a rogue triceratops to death, because that would be pretty hot, plus, hella triceratops meat. But a way bigger part of me wants a dude who laughs at my jokes and cooks the best chicken wings, so good it's fucked up. And will listen to Game of Thrones audiobooks with me in the car on the way to see Genuine perform at a local casino. Or, sure, evil side dudes, maybe I'm just looking for territorial urination and robust thatches of body hair. Whatever. You're probably righter about me than I am. Pesky lady brain. And from later in the article. And beyond that, you're not going to convince me that it's biologically impossible for me to feel the way that I feel, when that's the way that I feel. Even if I am, Deep down, attracted to dino-killers, the thick strata of personality and pragmatism in modern life piled above that bit of evo-psych speculation basically render it irrelevant. Telling people that they're wrong about their own experiences is one of the patriarchy's greatest hits. To claim that a theory is universally, fundamentally, exclusively true, directly in the face of people's expressed experiences, is to basically call everyone I know a liar. Is this thing actually happening? Are modern men only chasing subservient virgins? Do all women bond sexually with one man for life and attempt to trap him into a loveless mating contract? If a man can't defeat a rival in battle with his bare hands, is he doomed to a life of forced celibacy and or getting picked off by a pack of dire wolves? No? You mean people are also doing other stuff? Okay, then. Your thing is not true. Goodbye. And of course, there is the more academic feminist viewpoint. From Why Are Women Smaller Than Men? When Anthropology Meets Evolutionary Biology. By Priscille Touraille and Pierre-Henri Gouillon. In this paper, the common view that size dimorphism in humans results from the fact that the advantage of being big is stronger for men than for women is challenged by another hypothesis, namely that the difference results from a difference of cost rather than from a difference of benefits. The cost of being big would be higher in women simply because, under gender hierarchical regimes found in all cultures, men are allocated the best food. The interaction between evolutionary forces and cultural practices could then lead to this disadaptive situation. And it is thus suggested that, in humans, the differential cost associated with growth in males and females is different, thanks to the unequal sharing of resource between males and females. This would generate a dimorphism even in the absence of differences of benefits associated with increased size between the sexes. So, according to some, even evolved physical differences comes down to females being restricted by males. But might there be another explanation? Obviously, there are physical differences between males and females apart from genitalia. For example, males are typically taller, and have greater muscle mass. This obviously doesn't mean that every male is taller than every female, or that every male has greater muscle mass than every female. But as a general rule, males tend to be physically stronger. This is of course a byproduct of evolution. For the majority of human history, males and females had very different roles, based upon reproduction of the species. For our species to survive, we needed a consistently high birth rate, as the world was filled with dangers. Human gestation takes 9 months, it also takes time to recover, and children, in particular, infants, need to be cared for. Human children also take an exceptionally long period of time to reach adulthood, compared to other animals. Not to mention human infants are totally helpless when born, unlike many other species. This restricted female roles in warfare and hunting in early societies. But there was also another factor tied to reproduction. Female reproduction is limited to 1 child at a time. Actually, what I should have just said, is 1 pregnancy at a time, as a female can give birth to twins or triplets. But for the sake of keeping this explanation somewhat simple, let's exclude twins and triplets, and go with what is vastly the most common scenario, which is 1 pregnancy equals 1 child. However, male reproduction is only limited by the number of females a male can mate with. Provided all parties are fertile and capable of reproduction, of course. Because female reproduction is limited, and male reproduction is not, females are far more valuable than males to a society, whose survival depends on constant reproduction. Imagine there is a tribe of 10 people. I'm keeping numbers small here for simplicity, but this example also applies to large-scale societies. The tribe of 10 is divided equally between males and females. The tribe is divided by traditional gender roles. Males have the responsibility of hunting for food and protecting the tribe. Females have the tasks of pregnancy and child-rearing. Provided everyone is fertile, the tribe is capable of producing 5 children every 9 months, maximum. But imagine one day, while out hunting, 2 of the 5 males are killed. The tribe is still capable of producing 5 children every 9 months. Also in this scenario, everyone in the tribe gets to pass on their genes. But let's reverse the genders. Obviously females would not make good hunters or protectors while pregnant. But even while not pregnant, having female hunters or protectors would be a disadvantage to a tribe. Let's imagine the 5 female hunters go out hunting, while the males stay behind to rear the children. And similar to the first scenario, 2 out of the 5 female hunters are killed. This would be disastrous to the tribe. As now, the tribe could only produce 3 children every 9 months. And not every member of the tribe is going to get to pass on their genes. The first tribe has a far superior chance of survival, compared to the second. This is the origin of gender roles in society. It's the root cause of gynocentrism. And it's the reason why males are seen as disposable. It also accounts for males being on average, taller, and physically stronger. A male who is physically stronger is more likely to survive, and pass on his genes. He is also more likely to be chosen as a mate by a female, as he is not only more likely to be a good provider and protector, but his offspring are more likely to survive, and pass on their own genes. This is basic evolution. It's also why females go to see strippers like this, and not like this. I should also bring up tournament species and pair bonding species.
Armed with these sorts of principles, you could now look at all sorts of interesting domains of animal behavior and understand what the behavior is going to be like by using these. Okay, we start with the first example. Here we return to these guys, and we have one species here, and knowing this guy had a penis and this one nursed, we've got an adult male and an adult female. What is it that you can conclude in this species? Males are a lot bigger than females. So let's state it here as there's a big ratio of males to females. Meanwhile, in the next county, you've discovered another species where somebody's got a penis and somebody else is nursing, and their skulls are the exact same size. Oh, here's a species where there's no difference in body size between males and females. Okay, so let's begin to see, just using the principles we've got in hand already, what sort of stuff we can predict. Starting. Okay, which of those species? In one case, you have males being a lot bigger than females. In one case, you've got males being the same size as females. In which of those species, the first one like this, or the same size ones, in which ones would you expect to see more male aggression? First one. Okay, how come? Their bodies are built for it, which begins to tell you something. Their bodies are built for it, maybe because females have been selecting for that. You will see higher levels of aggression in species like this, where there's a big body size difference, and much less of it in these guys. Next, you now ask how much variability is there in male reproductive success. In one of these species, all the males have 1 or 2 kids over their lifetime. In another species, 95% of the reproducing is carried out by 5% of the males. A huge variability skew in male reproductive success. Which species do you get the every male has a couple of kids and that's about it and all equally so? Which one? Second one. How come? Because these guys are being selected for aggression. If they're fighting, there is going to have to be something they're fighting for, differential reproductive access. Okay, so you see more variability in species that look like this. Next, females come into the equation. What do females want? What do females want in the species on the left versus the one on the right? The one on the right, you know, again, skulls the same size, same body size. On the left, what does the female want? What sort of male is the female interested in? Big, exactly. That's exactly the driving force on this. How come? Because she's not going to get anything else out of this guy. This guy is just going to, like the present is going to be some sperm. It might as well be some good sperm, some genetically well-endowed sperm that makes for a big, healthy offspring, increasing the odds of her passing on copies of her genes in the next generation. What about in this species? What's females looking for? Okay. Good. Hold on to that for a second, and let's jump ahead a few lines. One of the species, males have never been known to do the slightest affiliative thing with infants. They just get irritated and harass them and all of that. In the other, you have soccer dads who are doing as much raising of the kids as the females are. In which species do you get lots of male parental behavior? The one on the right. Okay, so lots of male parental behavior here. So somebody just gave the answer here, female choice. What would you see in this species? You want big, muscular guys. You want whatever is selling that season for what counts as a hot male, because you want your offspring to have those traits. And somebody else called out here, what do females want in this category? And what was it you said?
Good personality.
Good personality, yes. Able to express emotions. That too. Okay, somebody else shouted out something that gets at the broader, more globally Oprah version. Okay, somebody shouted out parental behavior. You want a male who's going to be competent at raising your children. What is it that you want really most deeply? You want to get the male who is the most like a female you can get a hold of. You don't want some big old stupid guy with a lot of muscle and canines who's wasting energy on stuff like that he could be using instead on, reading Goodnight Moon or some such thing. What you want instead is somebody who's as close to a female as you can get to without getting this lactation stuff. Males are chosen who are the same size as females. So the term given here is choosing for paternal behavior, parental behavior, or parental, let's just put that in there. And that begins to explain the top line, species in which there's a lot of sexual dimorphism, morphism, shapes of things, sexual dimorphism, big difference in body size as a function of gender. And in these sorts of species where you get male parental behavior, not much variability in male reproductive success, low levels of regression, and what females want is a competent male, these are ones where you see low degrees of sexual dimorphism. So how's a female going to figure out that this guy is going to be a competent parent? Once again, we just figured out if he looks kind of like you, because that suggests he hasn't wasted health and metabolism on stupid, pointless muscles when there's more important things in life for making sure your kids have good values. What else would the female want to know when she's first considering mating with the male? Is he a nice guy? Is he sensitive? Does he express his feelings? Is he competent at being a parent? What do you want the individual to do? Prove to you that he can provide for the kids. And suddenly you have a world of male birds courting the females by bringing them worms, bringing them evidence that they are able to successfully forage, they are able to get food. Female choice is built around appearance and behavioral competence at being able to be a successful parent in order to pass on as many copies of genes to the next generation as possible. Okay, how about lifespan? In which species is there a big difference in life expectancy as a function of gender? First one. Here, are you choosing for males to be as close to females as possible, and thus the physiology. Here, you got these guys who are using huge amounts of energy to build up all this muscle, which takes a lot more work to keep in calories, and you're more vulnerable in famines. You've got these males with high testosterone, which does bad stuff to your circulatory system. You've got males who, thanks to all this aggression, are getting more injuries, more likely in species in which you have a lot of sexual dimorphism in body size, you get a lot of sexual dimorphism in lifespan. And then you look at these guys, and it's basically no difference by gender. Moving on, considering primates that are one of these two patterns, in which one do you always want to give birth to twins? In which one do you never want to give birth to twins? Who gives birth to twins? The one on the right. Of course. How come? Because you got two parents on the scene. You are not a single mother, and you are a single mother rhesus monkey or something, and you give birth to twins, and you do not have the remotest chance of enough energy, enough calories on board to get both of them to survive. A twin that is born in a species like this has the same rate that it occurs in humans, about a 1% rate, and it is almost inevitable that one of them does not survive. Meanwhile, there's a whole world of primate species with this profile where the females always twin. Finally, you are the female, and you are contemplating bailing out on your kids and disappearing because there's some really hot guy over there who you want to mate with, and you are trying to figure out this strategy. So you are going to leave and abandon your kids. In which species do you see that behavior? The one on the right. The one on the right, because you bail out and the male is there taking care of them. You bail out in here and you've lost your investment and copies of your genes for the next generation. You see female cuckoldry, this great Victorian term. You see females cheating on the fathers in this species, but not in species like this, because the father is long gone in 3 other counties there courting somebody else, and doesn't matter, you're not going to get any help from him. In primate species of this profile, you always see twinning. And they both survive. And what studies have shown in these species, and we'll get to them shortly, is after birth, in fact, the males are expending more calories taking care of the offspring than the females. Go bail out on him and go find some other hot guy, which in your species counts as some guy who looks even more like you than he does in terms of what you want out of the individual. So one asks expectedly, where do humans fit in on this one? Where do humans fit? And the answer is complicatedly. Are we a tournament species? Are we a pair bonding species? What's up with that? What we will see is we're kind of in between. When you look at the degree of sexual dimorphism, we are not like baboons, but we're sure not like marmosets. We're somewhere in the middle. Variability is somewhere in the middle there. I'm not going near that one. Lifespan, the dimorphism in lifespan tends to be in between, and parental behavior and likelihood of all of those. You look at a number of measures, and by next lecture, we will be looking at some genetics of what monogamous species and tournament species look like, and we're right in the middle. In other words, that explains like 90% of literature, because we're not a classic tournament species and we're not a classic pair bonding one. We are terribly confused in the middle there. And everything about anthropology supports that. Most people on the planet right now are in a form of monogamous relationships, in a culture that demands monogamy. An awful lot of people who are in monogamous relationships in such cultures aren't really in monogamous relationships. Traditionally, most cultures on this planet allowed polygamy. Nonetheless, in most of those polygamous cultures, the majority of individuals were pair bonded and monogamous. You get 2 different versions of polygamy in different social systems of humans. One is economic polygamy, which is you're basically sitting around and the wealthiest guy in the village is the one who can have the largest number of wives, an enormous skew in reproductive success that's driven by economics. The other type is demographic. You have a culture where, for example, you have a warrior class. Guys spend 10 years as warriors, New York City accent, as warriors. They don't worry, there's no anxiety, but they eventually worry about getting a wife, because by the time they're done being a warrior, they're like 25, and they marry someone who's 13, which is what you see in a lot of traditional cultures that follow that pattern. And at that point, you got a problem, which is an awful lot of those guys have been killed over the course of 10 years of being involved in high levels of aggression and 10 more years of life expectancy to catch up with you. There's a shortage of males. So you see polygamy there driven by demographics, and you see polygamy driven by economics and other types of society. So most cultures on this planet allow, traditionally, before the missionaries got them, most cultures on this planet allow polygamy. Nonetheless, within most polygamous cultures, the majority of people are not polygamous. We have one really confused, screwed up species here, because we are halfway in between in all sorts of these measures.
Ironically, in the Lindy West article I showed earlier, when she tries to dismiss evolutionary psychology, she actually proves it. She said, sure, maybe a part of me does want a dude who could kick a rogue triceratops to death, because that would be pretty hot. This of course is the female attraction to alpha males of the tournament variety. It also explains romance novels. It comes from the biological desire to mate with someone who is going to produce strong healthy offspring, which would have the best chance of survival. But, she also says, but a way bigger part of me wants a dude who laughs at my jokes and cooks the best chicken wings, so good it's fucked up. And this is pair bonding. The biological desire, or strategy, to find a good provider, who will help raise their offspring, thus increasing the offspring's chances of survival. But the differences between males and females aren't just to do with physical strength and size. There are also differences in the brain.
There are very clear sex differences in the brain, and we see these differences right from birth. Some people wonder whether these differences in the size of the brain or in the size of different parts of the brain have any impact on the child's psychological development. And certainly we know that girls talk earlier than boys, their language is developing faster, and the regions of the brain that are involved in language are larger in females than in males. The finding that the amygdala is larger in boys is interesting because in boys' and girls' social development, their understanding of other people's emotions, girls seem to develop faster, their empathy is better on average, and this may well relate to this difference in the size of the amygdala. Our research has been looking at whether children and indeed adults with autism might have an extreme of the male brain. So autism is a developmental condition where people have difficulty in developing friendships, relationships, communication, but where they also get very focused, sometimes called obsessional. And we've been interested to see whether the structure of the autistic brain might be an extreme of what we see in the typical male. When you compare groups of children with autism and without autism, children with autism show faster brain development, sometimes thought of as an overgrowth in the early years. And when you actually compare different parts of the brain, some structures fit this extreme male pattern. So the amygdala, which is larger in a typical male, is even larger in a child with autism. The corpus callosum, which is larger in a typical female, is even smaller in a child with autism. But we're also looking at these patterns in terms of psychology. So do children with autism show a profile that would match an extreme male profile? If it's the case that boys are developing slower socially and in terms of language, well then it's very clear that children with autism are developing social relationships and language even more slowly. So in that respect it does seem to fit. Some of the differences in the way the mind develops in boys and girls and the way the brain develops in boys and girls may reflect genetic differences. And if genes are involved, then it's only one small step to imagine that these may have been shaped by evolution, selected by evolution. And one view is that, in fact, in our early ancestry, our hominid ancestry, males and females occupied very different niches, different roles, with females taking much more of a role in childcare and in the community, much more of a social role, and with males having a much more of a solitary role in navigation of the landscape in search of resources. My own position is that I think biology and culture interact to create these sex differences. So I'm not a strong biological determinist, but neither am I a strong cultural or social determinist. I think there's a mix that comes together to create them. There are some people who would argue just for biology or just for culture, but I think the moderate position is to recognise that both are at work. I think there's a responsibility for people who look at sex differences to do so in a very careful, evidence-based way. It's very easy to make sweeping statements about groups of people, including the two sexes, which could easily become forms of discrimination or generalizations which simply don't apply. So research in this area, I think, can proceed, but it has to be very responsible. It has to be done in a responsible fashion. So not claiming more than can be reasonably claimed on the basis of evidence.
I would agree that gender is neither just genetics, nor is it just culture, but an extremely complex combination of the two. Environment shapes evolution, and in turn, evolution shapes culture. Culture thus becomes the new environment, which in turn shapes evolution. And around we go. But in modern times, cultural development and change has left evolution far behind in the dust. The Western diet, based on a desire for fatty foods, is the perfect example. Fatty food was once both a rarity and an advantage. Now it's in abundance and is a health issue. I also think gender is a spectrum, and shouldn't be seen as black and white. Just as there is variety in male height, with some males being tall, and some short, but most grouping towards tall. So we see a similar thing with gender. At the ends of the spectrum is the black and white, or masculinity and femininity. But the spectrum is filled with every shade of gray in between. Some men are more feminine, and some women are more masculine. Most people tend to naturally gravitate towards one side or the other, with a percentage somewhere in between. Personally, I'm happy to let people sit on the spectrum wherever they naturally find themselves. Males should be able to be masculine, or feminine, or anything in between on the gender spectrum. As females should be able to be feminine, or masculine, or anything else on the spectrum. Unfortunately, modern-day feminism tends to see only the negatives of masculinity, and only the positives of femininity. And then they have the nerve to call this equality. They tell us that gender is a social construct, with no evolutionary or genetic element, and then actively demonize masculinity every chance they get. They see it as a controlling, negative force, guilty of keeping the divine feminine in chains for centuries.
We feel deep love, great respect, and a growing sense of worship for the gifts of the feminine. We also feel deep sorrow about the destructive actions of the unconscious masculine in the past and present.
I do agree with feminists that strict gender roles in modern society are no longer needed. Because of modern medicine, clean drinking water, and abundance of food, and modern contraception, women no longer need be restricted to reproduction and child care. But that also means males no longer need to be disposable. Although I might agree with feminists that strict gender roles are outdated, I don't agree with their demonization of all that is masculine, their insistence that only culture is a factor, and their obsession with patriarchy, which is just misinterpreted gynocentrism. But I'll go into that more next episode. Obviously, the topics I discussed in this video are extremely complex, and I have tried to present them in a straightforward, simplified manner, within a video which is under 40 minutes long. Which means there are many aspects simply not covered. This is just meant to be a simplified overview after all. But I will include some links to some lectures on human sexual behavior, by Robert Sapolsky, which you might find interesting. A warning though, they are very long. Next episode I'll tackle the claim that society has been constructed by males, for the benefit of males, and at the expense of females. Until then, don't drink the poison Kool-Aid.
Can open this. Which is something you could do if you have a certain type of training, if you're some osteologist or whatever these folks are called. If you are presented those two skulls and told this one's a female, this one's a male, you can begin to figure out stuff like how heavy, how large the body was of that individual, what diseases they had they undergone malnutrition, had they given birth a lot of times, a few times, were they bipedal, all sorts of stuff you could figure out from just looking at these skulls. What today's lecture and Friday's is about is the fact that with the right tools under your belt, you could look at these two skulls and know that information. You're a field biologist and you've discovered this brand new species, and you see that this one nurses an infant shortly before leaping out of the tree, leaving only the skull, and this one has a penis shortly before leaping out of the tree and leaving a skull. So all you know is this is an adult female and an adult male, and if you've got the right tools there, you can figure out who's more likely to cheat on the other. Is the female more likely to mess around, or is the male? How high are the levels of aggression? Does the female tend to have twins or one kid at a time? Do females choose males because they have good parenting skills or because they're big, hunky guys? What levels of differences in life expectancy? Do they live the same length of time? You would be able to tell whether they have the same life expectancy or if there's a big discrepancy between the two. All sorts of stuff like that, merely by applying a certain piece of logic that dominates all of this. Okay, so you're back reading those Time, Life, Nature books back when, and there was always a style of thing you would go through, which is they described some species doing something absolutely amazing and unlikely, and it goes like this. The giraffe has a long neck, and it obviously has to have a big heart to pump all that blood up there, and you lock up a whole bunch of biomechanics people with slide rules, and out they come out with this prediction as to how big the giraffe heart should be and how thick the walls, and you go and you measure a giraffe heart, and it's exactly what the equations predicted. And you say, isn't nature amazing? Or you read about some desert rodents that drink once every 3 months, and another bunch of folks have done math and figured out how many miles long the renal tubules have to be, and somebody goes and studies it, and it's exactly as you expected. Isn't nature wonderful? No, nature isn't wonderful. You couldn't have giraffes unless they had hearts that were that big. You couldn't have rodents living in the desert unless they had kidneys that worked in a certain way. There is an inevitable logic about how organisms function, how organisms are built, how organisms have evolved, solving this problem of optimizing a solution. And what the next 2 lectures are about is you can take the same exact principles and apply them to thinking about the evolution of behavior. The same sort of logic where just as you could sit there and with logical principles come to the point of saying, a giraffe's heart is going to be this big, you can go through a different realm of logic built around evolutionary principles and figure out all sorts of aspects of social behavior. And we already know what's involved in, say, optimizing. What's the optimal number of whatever's in your kidney? What's the optimal behavior strategy or something? All of us, as soon as we got some kid sibling, learned how to do the optimal strategy in tic-tac-toe, and so that you could never lose, and it's totally boring. But that's a case of figuring out the optimal solution to behavior, reaching what is called the Nash equilibrium. And actually, I have no idea what I just said, but I like making reference to Nash because it makes me feel quantitative or something. So that is called the Nash equilibrium. The Nash equilibrium, and what the entire point here is the same sort of process of figuring out what are the rules of optimizing tic-tac-toe behavior can be built upon the principles of evolution to figure out all sorts of realms of optimized social behavior. And broadly, this is a field that's known as sociobiology, emerging in the late 1970s, mid-1970s or so, and by the late 1980s, giving birth to another discipline known as evolutionary psychology, the notion that you cannot understand behavior and you cannot understand internal psychological states outside the context of evolution had something to do with sculpting those behaviors and those psyches. So to start off with that, basic song and dance about Darwin, just to make sure we're up to speed on this. Darwin, just to get some things out of the way, Darwin did not discover evolution. People knew about evolution long before that. Darwin came up with the notion of a mechanism for evolution, natural selection, and in fact Darwin isn't the inventor of that. There was another guy, Alfred Russel Wallace, the two of them, and for some reason Wallace has gotten screwed historically and Darwin gets much more attention, but starting off with a Darwinian view of how evolution works. First thing being that there is evolution. Traits in populations change over time. Traits can change enough that, in fact, you will get speciation. New species will form. And the logic of Darwinian evolution is built on just a few couple of very reasonable steps. First one is that there are traits that are heritable. Traits that could be passed on one generation to the next. Traits that we now can translate in our modern parlance into traits that are genetic, and we will see soon how that's totally not correct to have said that, but traits that are heritable. The next thing is that there is variability among those traits. There's different ways in which this trait can occur, and they're all heritable. The next critical thing, some versions of those traits are more adaptive than others. Some versions work better for you. For example, giraffe who wind up with hearts the size of like a tomato, that's not an optimal version. Amid the range of variability, some will carry with them more fitness, more adaptiveness than others. And that translates into another soundbite that's got to be gotten rid of. All of this is not about survival of the most adapted. It's about reproduction of, something we will come to over and over again. It's about the number of copies of genes you leave in the next generation.